Imagine a world where a ragtag group of farmers dared to challenge the most powerful empire on Earth. It was not just a war for land, it was a desperate fight for the very soul of human freedom against impossible odds.
The British Empire stretched across the globe, commanding the mightiest army and navy known to man. In contrast, the 13 American colonies were divided, lacking a professional army and completely unprepared for the devastation that was about to unfold.
King George III believed in absolute authority. After fighting expensive wars elsewhere, he decided that the American colonists should pay for the protection the crown provided, regardless of whether they had a say in the matter.
Taxes began to rain down on everyday goods like sugar, tea, and legal documents. The colonists were furious, not just about the money, but about the principle. They had no voice in the British Parliament to argue their case.
The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. In Boston, angry crowds gathered to taunt the British soldiers occupying their city. What started as snowballs and shouting would soon escalate into something far more deadly and irreversible.
On a cold March night, panic struck. British soldiers fired into a crowd of civilians, killing 5 men. This tragic event, known as the Boston Massacre, became a rallying cry that echoed throughout every colony, demanding justice.
Rebels took action under the cover of darkness. The Sons of Liberty boarded British ships and dumped hundreds of crates of tea into the harbor. It was a bold act of defiance that struck the king where it hurt, his wallet.
Furious at the loss of revenue, the king ordered the port of Boston closed. He imposed the Intolerable Acts, hoping to starve the city into submission. Instead of crushing the rebellion, his cruelty united the colonies like never before.
Information was the rebels' most valuable weapon. Paul Revere and other writers galloped through the night to warn the countryside that the British regulars were marching out. The element of surprise was lost, and the militias began to gather.
At dawn on Lexington Green, a small group of militiamen stood nervously against the disciplined British ranks. They were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, yet they stood their ground, waiting for a moment that would change history forever.
Suddenly, a single shot rang out. Nobody knows who pulled the trigger first, but that sound shattered the morning air. The American Revolution had officially begun, turning a political dispute into a bloody and violent open war.
The colonists used the land to their advantage, hiding behind trees and stone walls. They picked off the exhausted British soldiers marching back to Boston. The Redcoats realized they were not fighting a traditional army, but an entire angry population.
Leaders from the colonies met in Philadelphia. They were a mix of radicals and conservatives, arguing over whether to seek peace or declare full independence. It was a dangerous game. If they failed, they would all hang for treason.
They needed a leader who could unite the North and the South. They chose George Washington, a tall, stoic Virginian. He accepted the command of the Continental Army, knowing well the impossible burden he was placing on his shoulders. On a hill overlooking Boston, the rebels dug in. Though they eventually ran out of ammunition and retreated, they inflicted massive casualties on the British. It proved that the American militia could stand toe-to-toe with the world's best army. In the summer of 1776, Thomas Jefferson was tasked with writing a document to explain their cause to the world. He penned words about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, concepts that were revolutionary for the time.
On July 4th, the delegates signed the Declaration of Independence. It was a death warrant for every man in that room if they lost. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the cause of freedom. The empire struck back with overwhelming force. A massive fleet of British ships arrived in New York, landing thousands of troops. Washington's inexperienced army was outmaneuvered and nearly crushed, forced to flee for their lives across the river.
Morale hit rock bottom. Washington's army was shrinking daily due to desertion and sickness. As winter approached, it looked like the revolution was doomed to fail before the year even ended. The cause of liberty hung by a thread.
Thomas Paine wrote The American Crisis, urging the men to persevere. He famously declared, These are the times that try men's souls. His words reignited a spark of hope in the freezing, hungry soldiers when they needed it most.
Desperate for a victory, Washington devised a risky plan. On Christmas night, amidst a blinding snowstorm, he led his men across the icy Delaware River. They marched through the snow, leaving bloody footprints, to launch a surprise attack. The surprise was perfect. At Trenton, they caught the Hessian mercenaries completely off guard. The victory was swift and decisive. This miraculous win shocked the British and convinced many American soldiers to re-enlist for another year of fighting. The British formed a new strategy to cut the rebellion in half by isolating New England. General Burgoyne marched a massive army south from Canada, expecting an easy path. However, the dense American wilderness would prove to be his undoing. American riflemen targeted officers and native scouts, slowing the British advance to a crawl. They chopped down trees to block roads and destroyed bridges. The British army, heavily laden with supplies, began to starve in the deep woods. At Saratoga, the Americans surrounded Burgoyne's exhausted army. With no escape, the British general was forced to surrender his entire force. It was a stunning victory that proved to the world the Americans could actually win this war. Benedict Arnold was a hero at Saratoga, fighting bravely despite a severe leg wound. However, feeling unappreciated and bitter, he would later commit the ultimate betrayal, attempting to sell the fort at West Point to the enemy. Benjamin Franklin used his charm in Paris to win support. After the news of Saratoga, France agreed to join the fight. They provided money, troops, and a navy. The war had now exploded into a global conflict for Britain. While diplomats celebrated, the army suffered at Valley Forge. It was a winter of starvation and disease. Men lacked shoes and blankets, leaving bloody trails in the snow. Yet, under Washington's leadership, the core of the army survived. A Prussian officer, Baron von Steuben, arrived to help. He taught the ragtag militia professional drills, how to march, and how to use the bayonet. By spring, the chaotic mob had transformed into a disciplined fighting machine. The new training was tested at Monmouth. In blistering heat, the Americans stood toe-to-toe with the British regulars in a traditional field battle. They did not run. The war settled into a stalemate in the north. Britain changed tactics again, focusing on the south, where they believed many loyalists lived. They captured major cities like Charleston and Savannah, hoping to claw their way back up the continent one colony at a time. The fighting in the south was brutal and personal. British officer Bannister Tarleton became infamous for showing no mercy, slaughtering surrendering troops. His cruelty backfired, driving neutral farmers to join the Patriot cause out of anger. Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, led bands of men in hit-and-run attacks. They struck quickly and vanished into the marshes, where the British could not follow. These tactics drained the British Army's strength and patience.
At the Battle of Cowpens, American General Daniel Morgan used a brilliant trap. He ordered his militia to fire twice and retreat, luring the overconfident British into a wall of hardened Continental soldiers. The British force was devastated.
British General Cornwallis chased the American army across the Carolinas. Although he won, technically, at Guilford Courthouse, he lost a quarter of his men. Exhausted and running low on supplies, he retreated to the coast of Virginia to rest. Cornwallis settled in Yorktown, waiting for the Royal Navy. But Washington saw an opportunity. He faked an attack on New York, then raced his army south. Simultaneously, the French fleet arrived, blocking the British escape by sea. The French Navy fought a crucial battle against the British fleet at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The British were forced to retreat, leaving Cornwallis completely trapped with no hope of reinforcements or evacuation.
Washington and his French allies laid siege to Yorktown. Day and night, cannons pounded the British defenses. The Allied forces dug trenches, inching their way closer and closer to the British lines, tightening the noose.
To finish the siege, key British defenses had to be taken. Alexander Hamilton led a daring night attack with unloaded muskets, using only bayonets to maintain silence. They overran the positions, making the British situation hopeless. On October 17, 1781, the British guns fell silent. A drummer boy appeared, beating a request for a parley, followed by an officer waving a white handkerchief. The fighting had ended. The impossible victory was at hand.
Thousands of British soldiers marched out to surrender their weapons. Legend says their band played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." A group of farmers had defeated the mightiest empire in history.
It took 2 more years for the official peace treaty to be signed in Paris. Britain formally recognized the United States as a free, sovereign, and independent nation. The borders were set, and a new country was born.
The last British troops evacuated New York City. As they left, fireworks lit up the sky. The occupation was over. The Americans were now masters of their own destiny, free to shape their future without a king.
In an emotional scene at Fraunces Tavern, Washington said goodbye to his officers. These men had suffered and bled together for 8 long years. Tears were shed as the commander embraced his brothers in arms one last time.
In a move that stunned the world, Washington did not seize power. He went to Congress and resigned his commission, returning his power to the people. King George III reportedly said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." The war was won, but the work had just begun. These men would go on to craft a constitution, building a government by the people, for the people. Their experiment in democracy continues to this very day.
Thank you for watching this incredible journey of independence. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below about which historical event we should cover next.